To set up our failover cluster, I have my RTS DC1 already running and powered on, but I'm going to go to RTS Serve 1, and on RTS Serve 1, I'm just going to connect to it, and I'm going to sign in with my domain administrator account. For me, that's RTS Networking. And once we sign in, we will just install the failover cluster feature on this server. Then we're set to begin the configuration. So in Server Manager, add roles and features. I'm going to full screen that. Role-based. And I'm loading this right now on RTS Serve 1. We're going to click Pass Server Roles up to the Features. And on the Select Features, you'll see Failover Clustering is in the list. And I want to add features, which just has the PowerShell module, the cluster management tools. So you're always going to add that. And that is it. We will accept the defaults for everything else. Well, one exception. This does need to restart. So I'm going to select Restart the server automatically. And now we will just let it install. Now that that's rebooted, I'm going to sign back in, but I'm going to use my domain account, not the local. That's going to briefly complete the install of the failover cluster feature. That'll take just a moment. That's done. So I'm just going to go to Close. And now I'm going to go to Tools, and you'll see Failover Cluster Manager is in my list. We'll just close that pop-up. So in the Failover Cluster Manager, the first thing I need to do is create a cluster. So to do that, I can go to Actions over here, or you can just right-click the Failover Cluster Manager and you get the same choices. But I'm going to choose Create a Cluster. On this Before You Begin, I'm just going to click Next. Now it says, what's the name of the servers in the cluster? I'm just going to enter RTS SVR1, the server I'm actually on. And we'll just choose Next. Now it asks if I want to run this validation. I can say yes. When I click Next, run the configure validation tests. But this is going to come back and tell me that I don't have any storage selected or anything like that. So I know I'm going to get a bunch of error messages. Instead, I'm going to say, no, I don't require support from Microsoft. Now, one advantage to doing this is if you say no right now, you can go through and configure everything in your cluster, and you can then run the validation at any time you choose. Anytime you modify any settings related to the cluster, it's always recommended that you run the validation again. But for now, I want to say no to the validation. Now it says, what do you want to name the cluster? I'm just going to name it RTS-cluster. What IP address do I want to give the cluster? I'm going to give it the IP address 192.168.1.254. Now, I'm going to leave that screen there for one moment, and I'm just going to pull up PowerShell briefly. And in PowerShell, I'm just going to type ping 192.168.1.254. Notice I do not get a reply. It's going to say destination host unreachable. Nothing responds to that address right now because that address is not actually in use. After we're done, we'll see we'll actually get a reply from that address. So that's going to be the name of the cluster, RTS-cluster, and the IP address of the cluster. Now, in this confirmation, I can see the name of the cluster, the node, DNS and Active Directory domain services, and I can see the IP address. Now, when we click next, it runs pretty quick, but it's going to tell us that it's creating a computer account for the RTS-cluster. So this is going to show up in Active Directory. You'll see create computer object, RTS-cluster. Went by too fast to fully read it. And you'll see that is now finished. So our cluster has been fully created. Well, what I'm going to do for one moment, I'm just going to minimize this, and I'm going to switch to RTS-DC1. On RTS-DC1, I'm just going to open Active Directory users and computers. And we're actually going to see this when I go to the computers container. RTS-cluster shows up. The only way you know that this is not an actual computer, but instead a cluster, is because in the description it put Failover cluster virtual network name account. If not for that, there is no way you would be able to distinguish this from just being a computer that's been joined to the domain. So that's the way the cluster actually operates within Active Directory. It really virtually has its own computer account. But we know I installed that on RTS Serve 1, and right now that's where it's actually hosted, but it looks like its own computer. Now I'm going to switch back to RTS Serve 1. So we have the cluster installed, the cluster's created. I'm going to go to PowerShell, and I'm just going to ping 192.168.1.254. Now I get a reply. So we know the cluster actually communicates. I'm also going to ping RTS-cluster, and you'll see it automatically appended the domain name, rtsnetworking.com. But it resolved that through DNS to 192.168.1.254, and we get a reply. So everything about this now tells us that this cluster is online and working. You know, in some ways, we're almost done with the configuration. What I'm going to do is add my storage first. So I'm going to go to storage, and this will ask me if I want to add disks, if I want to add a storage pool, or if you have purchased an enclosure. Now, if you have a storage pool that you've already created, you could simply add that storage pool. Or you could even create a new storage pool from here, so you would not have to go back to Server Manager and create a storage pool and then come back here. You could directly create that from here, assuming you have the drives already available. Now, I'm going to use the iSCSI SAN that we configured. So I'm just going to right click and add disk. And this cluster disk 1, that's the 100 gig drive that we bought online for our iSCSI SAN. So I'm just going to click OK for that. And that is online. Now, we know that iSCSI disk really went back to RTS-DC1, and that's where the iSCSI was set up. That was our target server. So we now have taken care of storage. What I'm going to do now is go to roles, and I'm going to create a file server. So we're going to make a file server highly available. To do that, I'm just going to go to configure role, and you'll see the roles that we can actually cluster. So DFS is in the list, file server, virtual machines, but file server is what I want. I'm going to say I want a file server just for general use, and you'll see that supports the file server resource manager, DFS replication, other file services. So that's the one we want. The client access point. This is going to be the name that users actually use to connect to this. Well, I'm going to name this RTS-file01. Now it says, what's the IP address for this? I'm going to use the IP address 100. So 192.168.1.100. And I'm just going to say next. This is the storage we added to the cluster. Now that's why we needed to add the storage first. You had to add the storage first. If not, this would just give you an error message and tell you that no storage is available. And that's it. So you'll see it's going to be named RTS-file01. The IP address ends in 100, and it's also going to create an account for itself in the computers container in Active Directory. So I'm just going to click Next. That is finished. So now, well, it says that's online. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to PowerShell, and I'm going to ping 192.168.1.100. We get a reply. And I'm also going to ping RTS-file01. That was the name. That resolves to that address. So everything about this says that this is like a file server now. Pretty fascinating. Now, we don't have anything in it yet. So what I'm going to do, I'm on roles, and you see RTS-file01, even looks like a server. I'm going to click on RTS-file01, and over here, down under Actions, I see RTS-file01, but there's an option to add a file share. So I'm just going to click Add a File Share. And it says, what type of share do you want? The bottom two, we don't care about those. That's NFS. You would use that if you were connecting to like a Unix server. That is the file system for Unix. SMB is for Windows. Now, SMB share quick advanced applications. Not really any difference depending on which one you click. But if I click advanced, you'll see it's going to set this access denied assistance, configure some classification. It's going to enable the quotas we talked about in File Server Resource Manager. If you select applications, it says you should use this with like database files or Hyper-V files. And the quick says it's just for like a general file share. All this does is change the permissions based on which one you actually choose. But we're going to choose quick because that is the most common. Now you'll see the E drive. We know that's our iSCSI centralized storage. So I'm just going to leave that like it is and just click Next. Now it says, what do you want to name the share? Well, I'm going to name the share corp-data. Now, configure share settings. This is not really our concern. This is more related to shared folders. But if I want to have continuous availability, if I want to allow this to be cached when users connect to it, if I want this to be encrypted. Now, one neat option here is enable access-based enumeration. What that actually means, let's say you don't have access to this share, or you have never been assigned permissions to it. If you were to browse this RTS-file01, you would not see the share if you don't have read access or higher. So if you would have been given the message access is denied because you have no permissions assigned, it simply hides the folder from your view and you wouldn't even see it in the screen if you don't have access to it. Now there's no configuration for that. You just enable that on a share if you choose to. But that's been an option since Server 2008. Hide folders from view that you don't have permissions to. But I'm just going to click Next for that. For permissions, I could go through and customize the permissions. So I could set my NTFS permissions. I could set my share permissions right now. But I'm not going to make any changes to that. I'm just going to click Next and Create. And we'll close. Our file share is completely online. Now, any user could simply browse RTS-file01. Looks like a computer. They're going to see this corp data folder show up. And now they could go create files I'll say file 06. They could create content in this. Everything about it looks like it's a file share, but it's actually in the failover cluster. Pretty fascinating concept. Well, right now, I don't have high availability because only RTS Serve 1 is in my failover cluster. I want to put RTS Serve 2 in it as well. So when I go to nodes, you'll see just the one machine. Well, I'm going to go back to Server Manager, and I'm going to just click on All Servers. RTS Serve 2 is in the list. So what I'm going to do is remotely install failover clustering. Oops. I accidentally clicked the restart service. I meant to click add roles and features. So I'm just going to click next, role-based, serve 2, and we'll click up to features, and failover clustering is in the list. And we know it does need to restart, so I'm just going to click restart and install. And that'll take just a moment, then that server will restart. That succeeded, so that's just going to restart. Then it'll be online in just a moment. So I'm going to close that window there. That's probably restarted by now. So what I'm going to do is just go to my nodes, and I'm going to add a node. The server name, RTS SVR2, and we'll just add. So that is online because it just dropped to the line here, so I know it's been contacted. I'm going to say no to the validation. Next. And I'm just going to click next. That is configuring the cluster. That was successful. So now when I click finish, I have 2 nodes in my cluster. What this means now, well, if I actually connect to RTS Serve 2, this is one of the things I love about this. Once you create your cluster, you just join other servers to it. You don't really configure anything on those servers. So I'm going to sign in. Now when I go to Tools and I pull up the Failover Cluster Manager, I'll close this pop-up window. That minimized. But I'll see the cluster shows up. If I go to roles, I see the file share is visible. And if I click on nodes, I see the same exact configuration. So all that happens is we added one server to our cluster, configured everything in the cluster. Then we just went to another server, installed failover cluster, and added that node to our cluster. That is it. So I don't configure the share or anything like that on RTS Serve 2. You just join it to the cluster. If I wanted a 3-node cluster, I would simply install failover clustering on another node, and then I would just join it to the cluster. Now you can manage this from either node. Pretty fascinating. Well, if I go back to roles, notice right now for RTS file 01, so that's has our share on it.